The wind had a mean bite that morning, sharp like it hadn't yet decided if winter was done with the town of Dry Creek. It funneled between buildings, kicking dust into the corners of cracked porches and whistling through the broken slats of the feed store's fence. At the edge of the post office steps, a girl stood still as a fence post, shoulders drawn in, fists clenched tight around a creased, yellowing envelope with no stamp and no name on it. Just blank. Like the day had no reason to remember her. Lena Mae Dalton was 12, though she didn't look it. Grief had a way of pulling the corners down on a child's face, of shrinking joy into something quiet and brittle. Her black dress was one size too big and patched at the shoulder. Her shoeshire only bit hard at the toes, the leather cracked in places where her feet had grown too fast. She didn't blink against the dust. Didn't move except to shift the envelope from one hand to the other. Her cheeks were splotched red with cold and leftover tears, and her dark hair had come loose in the wind, whipping like little snakes around her jaw. People walked past. A man with a saddle over one shoulder gave her half a nod, then kept walking. Two women in town coats looked but didn't stop, their arms full of cloth and chatter. Nobody said her name. Nobody said, "Happy birthday." Nobody said sorry. From across the street, through the smeared glass of the saloon's front window, Elias Harlow watched her like a man who'd seen this sort of quiet before. He sat in the same corner booth he always did, boots planted wide, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee that had gone lukewarm half an hour ago. His coat was worn buffalo hide, the sleeves darkened from rain and time, and his hat sat beside him on the bench, brim down. A long scar cut through the stubble on his cheekbone, the kind folks didn't ask about twice. He didn't drink hard liquor, didn't raise his voice, didn't keep company much since his wife died 5 winters back. But he noticed. He noticed the way Lena Mae's shoulders didn't flinch, even when the post office door slammed behind her. He noticed how she didn't bother to knock or ask or go inside, just waited. Like maybe the building owed her something it had no intention of giving. He let the silence sit a beat longer, then stood. Crossed the porch of the saloon with that slow, even stride of a man who only moved when he meant it. The spurs on his boots didn't jingle, they whispered. Dust rose at his heels as he stepped down into the street, crossed it, and stopped 5 feet from the girl, the wind pulling at the edge of his coat. She didn't look up. He didn't say her name, just watched her watch the envelope, like it might open itself and pull a mother's voice out of thin air. Then, quiet as a creek at dawn, he tipped his hat and asked, "You eaten today?" She blinked. Once, then twice. Her lip trembled like maybe a word had tried to form and died before reaching daylight. But she didn't answer. Not yet. The sky hung low that afternoon, pale and mean like it had nothing better to offer than cold light and dry wind. Dust gathered at the corners of window panes and under the hem of Lena Mae's dress as she walked, the envelope still clenched in her small hand. Elias Harlow didn't say another word. Just fell into step behind her like a shadow with spurs. The distance between them wasn't more than a few paces, but it stretched wide like the space grief puts between the living. They passed the blacksmith's, where the hammering had stopped just long enough for folks to murmur and stare from behind drawn curtains. The funeral had been that morning short, polite, uncomfortable. A pine box lowered into clay behind the chapel. Her mama hadn't been well for months, but dying on your daughter's birthday still felt like a cruelty even the preacher couldn't explain. Folks brought flowers, but none stayed long enough to offer a ride home. Lena Mae kept walking until she reached the crooked line of mailboxes just past the edge of town, 5 metal mouths hanging open like they were too tired to hold anything of worth. She stopped in front of hers, the one with the bent flag and the D still faintly scratched into the rust. Elias stopped too, saying nothing, boot heels still in the road gravel. She opened the box slow, like something might leap out, or maybe like it wouldn't, and that would be worse. It was empty. Just a hollow metal clank and a bit of grit inside. No envelope, no folded birthday note, no soft words in slanted handwriting that only a mother could make feel like music. Her hand stayed on the rim longer than needed, fingers running once along the inside edge like she might feel something left behind, heat from a ghost or the shadow of a thought that hadn't reached her in time. Elias watched the way her shoulders didn't fall, because they'd never been lifted in the first place. Watched the way her lips pressed together like she was holding something between them. Something she didn't want to let out. "Mama used to write me poems on my birthday," she said after a while, voice like paper rubbed thin, soft and unsure it deserved to be heard. Then she closed the mailbox. She didn't look back at Elias, didn't ask him anything or offer to stay or explain, just turned, slow as winter thaw, and started walking again back toward nothing in particular. Her dress tugged at her knees, the wind pushing against her like it had some personal quarrel with her being upright. Elias didn't follow this time. He just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, watching the small figure grow smaller against the dusty stretch of road. He didn't call after her. But he didn't stop watching, either. The air at the edge of Elias Harlow's ranch was still, the kind of still that made you hear things that weren't there. Wind brushing over old shingles, the crack of settling wood, footsteps from winters long gone. Inside the cabin, he crouched near the hearth, rummaging through an old wooden crate that hadn't been opened in years. His hands moved slow, careful, the way a man touches memory when it comes in objects. At the bottom, beneath a scrap of burlap and a broken bridle bit, he found a round, tin-dented, rust-flecked, the label long faded. He opened it. Inside lay a handful of stubby beeswax candles, pale gold and misshapen from heat and time. He picked one out, rolled it between his fingers. It smelled faintly of honey and old days. Days with laughter that echoed down halls now hollow. Days when his wife used to light them just to mark the end of something, harvest, winter, a child's birthday. Elias lit a match, struck it clean against the stone. The candle flared to life in a soft, steady glow. He watched the flame dance for a few seconds, then leaned forward and blew it out. The smoke curled up like breath held too long, then let go. Miles away, behind the chapel, Lena Mae Dalton crouched in the dirt. Her knees were raw, where her dress had torn, and her fingers were caked brown. She didn't mind. She just kept scraping the end of a twig in the soft earth, spelling her name out slow, over and over again. Lina. Then she'd stop, rub it out, start again. Lin. The soup came in a tin bowl with a chipped rim. It was warm, smelling faintly of chicken, and too much salt. The preacher's wife set it down on the step beside her, said something soft and polite, and walked away. She'd forgotten the spoon. Lena Mae stared at the soup for a long while, the steam lifting like a question. Then she cupped her hands, dipped them in, and drank. Quietly. No mess, no slurping. Just the sound of breath and broth and the soft scrape of her stick in the dirt. Elias didn't know how long she'd been sleeping at the sheriff's office, but he guessed it started the day they closed the coffin and let the dirt do its part. Folks didn't know what to do with a girl too old for pity and too young to manage alone. So she slept on the bench under the overhang, wrapped in her mother's old coat, head pressed to the wall like she was waiting for it to open and say, "Come in." That night, after the sun had dropped below the ridge and the world had gone blue with dusk, Elias walked into town. He didn't stop at the saloon or the store. Didn't nod at the deputy who watched from the window. Just stepped up to the porch of the sheriff's office, crouched low, and set down a small square bundle cornbread wrapped neat in a cloth napkin. No note, no knock, no noise. Just warmth, wrapped quiet. The door creaked when Lena Mae pushed it open, as if the house had to clear its throat after being quiet too long. The hinges stuck halfway, then gave with a groan, letting in a slice of gray morning light and the smell of damp dust. She stepped over the threshold like a stranger, though she'd lived there all her life, small feet padding soft over the worn floorboards, each one groaning like it remembered the weight of her mother's step. It still smelled like liniment and rose soap. The scent wrapped around her, gentle and sharp all at once, clinging to the corners, the curtains, the faint quilt lines on the sofa her mother used to lie on during the bad days. Lena didn't head there. She walked straight into the kitchen, the hem of her dress brushing crumbs from a chair leg as she passed. Dust blanketed the table like it had grown root-settled and content to stay. She stood in the spot where the birthday cake always went, right there, every April, same plate, same smile, same candle, just one, never more than that. Her mama used to say, "A flame's enough to remember, not to measure." They'd light it before supper, and even if there wasn't a gift, there was always frosting, always humming, always that one line of a lullaby her mama never finished singing. This year, there was no flame. No supper either, just a table that looked like it didn't expect company anymore. Lena didn't sit. She opened a drawer with both hands, tugging against the swollen wood until it gave. Inside were bits and pieces of life, rusted pair of scissors, 2 old keys with no doors to match, a scrap of ribbon, and tucked against the back corner, a faded bonnet and a music box with a missing handle. She picked up the box and shook it gently, but no sound came out. The lid still opened. Inside, the ballerina leaned sideways, dress faded, paint chipped at the eyes. Lena watched it for a moment. Still, like it had forgotten how to move. She didn't cry, not yet. She stood there, cradling the broken thing in both hands like it might warm if held long enough, when the knock came, not loud, not urgent. Just a patient sound, like someone who didn't mind being ignored but hoped they wouldn't be. She walked to the door and opened it. Elias stood on the porch, hat in hand, wind tugging gently at his coat. He didn't look like a man with a mission, just a man who noticed. Under one arm he held a small leather-bound book, edges worn, the kind of thing that had been opened many times with care. He didn't step forward, didn't clear his throat or offer small talk, just held the book out, eyes steady, voice low. "Got something yours." The book was heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in what it carried. Elias held it out with both hands, not like an offering, but like a bridge between two people standing on opposite sides of something too deep to cross with words. Lena May didn't reach for it right away. She just looked at it, then up at him, as if trying to decide whether it was real or just one more piece of her mama echoing through the day like the smell of rose soap and the quiet that followed. "It was in your mama's sewing chest," Elias said. "Sheriff handed it off to the church. Pastor didn't know what to do with it." He paused, eyes steady but gentle. "Figured it ought to go where it belongs." Still, Lena didn't move. So he stepped forward just enough to set the journal on the table near the doorway. Then he tipped his hat, turned, and walked back into the wind, not waiting for a thank you, not needing one. The porch creaked once behind him, then fell silent again, just the soft sound of the door easing shut against the cold. Lena stared at the book for a long time. The leather was cracked at the spine, and the edges of the pages had curled in on themselves like they were trying to keep something in. She touched it with her fingertips first, like it might bite. Then she pulled it closer, opened it slow. The first page had her mother's name scrawled in slanted handwriting, neat at the start, and more rushed near the end. She turned page after page, skimming the loops and lines that ran like rivers across the paper grocery lists, thoughts, half-prayers, a recipe for honey biscuits, a drawing of a flower with no name. One page where the ink had bled from tears that dried before they were seen. Then she found it. Tucked inside, folded twice, and tucked between 2 blank pages like it had been hidden away or forgotten on purpose. The paper was soft at the edges, the way old things get when they've been waiting too long. In the corner, written in her mama's hand, "For Lena May, your 13th birthday." She sat down, kerosene lamp casting a yellow glow over the table. Shadows flickered up the walls, catching on corners and the edge of the window pane. The poem wasn't long, wasn't perfect. A few lines scratched out, some misspelled words. The last stanza was cut short like her mama had run out of time. But the words were hers. Lena read it out loud, slow and soft, stumbling once over a line about spring, and something about her smile being a song I never learned but always knew. She didn't understand every phrase, but she understood the ache between the words, the way the letters tilted left when her mama must have been tired, the way the ink grew heavier near the bottom, like she was pressing too hard, like she knew the end of the page was coming too fast. Lena folded the poem back up and held it against her chest. And then it broke. The tears came slow at first. One, then another, then the kind of sobs that started low in the belly and rose up sharp, cracking her open like a branch in a storm. She didn't try to stop it. She couldn't. It hurt deep and wide and old. She wept over the journal, over the candlelit shadows, over the lines unfinished. She wept because her mama had remembered, and because she was gone, and because sometimes remembering made it worse. But even so, she clutched the book tighter and didn't let go. The sun hadn't fully cleared the ridge when Elias stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in the cold air, hat low over his brow. The field stretched quiet before him, mist still clinging low over the grass like a breath held too long. He didn't expect to see her, not that early, not there. But there she was, Lena May Dalton perched on the edge of his pasture fence, like she'd been grown from the earth itself, boots soaked in dew, dress hem damp and wrinkled. She didn't look up when he approached, didn't greet him, just held something out in her small hand, palm flat. A bent nail, dirt-caked, dull in the morning light. "You missed one," she said, voice dry as fence posts. Elias looked at the nail, then at her, and nodded once like that was all the explanation the world needed. He reached into the pouch on his hip and pulled out the hammer, placed it in her hand without a word. It dwarfed her fingers, heavy and solid and worn smooth from years of quiet labor. "Then fix it," he said. And that was that. She didn't ask where to start, just dropped to a crouch near the sagging board and set to work. He stayed nearby, driving his own nails into posts farther down the line, rhythm steady, not rushing. The sound of metal hitting wood echoed across the open field like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Hers was less sure, more hesitant, but she didn't stop. Not even when the wind picked up or the clouds thickened above them, like the sky was thinking hard about rain. They didn't talk. Didn't need to. There's a language in doing, in the way two people move around each other without stepping on silence. Elias measured the line of the fence with his eyes. She watched him do it once, then mimicked it. She wiped her hands on her dress without flinching. By noon, she was crouched in the dirt, hair stuck to her forehead, cheeks streaked with dust, and the poem still folded neat in her pocket, like armor you keep close to the skin. She stood and said, "Water?" He pointed toward the well. She came back with a tin cup, lips damp, eyes clearer than they'd been since the funeral. Then she knelt again, drove another nail. The sun climbed, and they kept working. Posts straightened, boards replaced, nails lined up like soldiers ready for orders. Elias never said she could stay, Lena never asked, but neither of them moved to leave. By sundown, her fingers were blistered and brown at the tips, and her knees were caked in dry mud. She stood beside him, both of them looking out at the line they'd fixed together uneven, imperfect, but standing. She didn't smile, not quite, but something in her shoulders eased. And when Elias gathered his tools, she followed, still silent, still carrying that folded page like it was stitched to her heart. By the time the wildflowers started pushing up along the edge of the pasture, no one asked why Lena May was at Elias Harlow's place most days. The town had made its assumptions, as towns do, then grown quiet when none of them turned out to be scandalous or strange. She came each morning before the heat set in, dragging her boots through the gravel, her hair still damp from the pump. She fed the chickens, checked the coop. Sometimes she swept the porch without being asked. Other times she just sat on the fence rail, tracing the grain of the wood with the edge of her nail. Elias didn't ask where she went at night. He didn't ask why she stopped going back to the preacher's wife, or why she'd taken to sitting under the clothesline and reading her mama's journal aloud to herself in a whisper. He didn't ask what made her cry sometimes in the barn, with her hands folded like a prayer she didn't know how to finish. He just noticed she was showing up earlier, staying longer, eating more, speaking less. Then one afternoon, when the sun hit the barn just right, and the whole field smelled like warm hay and old wood, she saw it. A card pinned to the barn door with a roofing nail. The corners curled with age, and smudges of flour and oil stained the edges. The handwriting was her mother's, slanted, looping, pressed deep into the paper like she had written it with purpose. The title at the top made her breath catch: Lena's birthday cake. She stood there for a long time, one hand pressed flat to the wood, eyes scanning the ingredients. 2 eggs, buttermilk. A pinch of cinnamon, because smiles taste warm, her mama had once said. In the margin, a small note in tiny print: 1 candle, light before supper. She didn't ask how Elias found it. Didn't ask when he'd gone into her mama's house, or how he knew where to look. Just turned, recipe in hand, and said, "We got flour?" They worked in the kitchen like it was a sacred thing, each movement quiet and deliberate. Elias stirred while she measured. She cracked the eggs with too much force, one shell splintering into the bowl. He picked the pieces out with the edge of a spoon. She poured the batter too fast. He scraped the sides without a word. They moved around each other without bumping, like they'd been doing it a long time. The cake burned a little at the edges. Neither of them cared. When it cooled, they set it on the table without a plate, just the bare wood between them. Elias found a single beeswax candle in the crate by the hearth and stuck it dead center, crooked and leaning. The sun was sinking by then, pouring gold through the windows and making shadows stretch like long goodbyes. Lena struck the match with steady hands. The flame caught slow, flickered, then held. Neither of them spoke. They just watched it burn. She took the first bite. Then he did. And when she laughed, really laughed, high and sudden like a note too long held, Elias smiled. It was June, not April. But they ate the cake anyway. The wind that day carried heat instead of dust. It rustled through the pasture grass and set the laundry line to creaking as it tugged at the sleeves of Elias's old work shirts. The sun had risen hard and bright, already baking the earth by mid-morning. Elias was fixing the south fence again, his hands steady, boots planted wide, each swing of the hammer met with a dull, satisfying thud. He heard the horse first, slow and unhurried on the trail leading in. When he looked up, the sheriff was already halfway up the path, coat unbuttoned, hat low, expression unreadable as always. A man who'd long stopped pretending to like surprises. He didn't dismount, just held out a folded envelope from his saddle like it was something rotten he didn't want to keep in his hand a moment longer. "From a Dalton cousin," he said. "St. Louis. Says she'll take the girl." Elias took the letter without a word. The sheriff's gaze lingered a beat too long, his eyes moving past Elias toward the barn, toward the faint figure kneeling in the dirt, picking weeds from between rows of fledgling corn. "You know it's not right," the sheriff muttered. "A man your age, a girl her size, you've got no papers, no claim." Elias didn't flinch, just turned and walked away, letter in hand, dust rising in soft clouds behind him. Lena May was kneeling near the corner post when he reached her, dirt streaked across her cheek, straw caught in her hair. She looked up, wiping her hands on her dress, and he offered the letter like it weighed nothing, though it felt heavy in his grip. She didn't take it right away, just stared at the envelope, the script on the front, careful and precise, like it had been written by someone who never once spelled her name in the dirt. After a long moment she reached for it. Her fingers trembled when they touched the paper, knuckles pale. She turned it over once, then again, not opening it, just staring like it might speak first. She didn't ask who it was from. She didn't need to. Her voice came soft, barely above the wind. "If I go, who remembers her poems?" Elias didn't speak. Didn't breathe for a second. He just looked out across the field, his jaw tight, his grip tightening on the rough grain of the fence post beside him until his knuckles turned the color of bone. The hammer dangled from his other hand, forgotten. Lena tucked the letter into the pocket of her dress without opening it. She went back to weeding, slower this time, her eyes glassy and far away. Elias stayed there a while, hands still on the post, as the breeze lifted the hem of her dress and the sun kept climbing. He didn't follow her, he didn't press. But when she bent to pull another weed, he bent too, kneeling beside her, side by side in the dirt, saying nothing. And staying. The house was quiet in that way. Only night can make it deep and stretched thin, every creak echoing twice as loud, every shadow sitting heavier. Elias noticed the absence first as a shift in the air, like something had been lifted out of the room while his back was turned. The fire had burned down to embers. Her cup sat untouched on the table. And the journal, the one she never left behind, was still lying open near the hearth. He stood slowly, boots dragging a soft scuff across the floorboards, and moved to the door. It was cracked open, just wide enough for a child to slip through. The wind had died by then, and the sky hung dark and still above the pasture. He didn't call for her, didn't shout, he knew better than that. When silence hangs that thick, you don't break it with panic, follow it like a trail. He found her in the barn. Not hiding, not running, just there curled beside the saddle blanket near the back stall, knees to her chest, the broken music box lying next to her in the straw like a wounded animal. The lamp, hanging by the door, cast long shadows, catching her face in pieces, the streaks of dirt, the tired slouch of her shoulders, the raw rub of grief that clung to the corners of her mouth. She looked up when he stepped inside, her voice flat as winter bark. "It doesn't play," she said, barely louder than a whisper. "Neither did I." Elias didn't speak. He just knelt down, slow beside her, the wood floor groaning under his weight. His fingers reached for the box, brushing against hers before she let go. The winding key was missing, but he pressed his thumb to the back panel and turned it gently, coaxing it into motion. For a moment, nothing. Then a click. And a hum. The sound that came out was thin, like it had traveled through too many winters, warped and staggered and lost somewhere in the middle of a lullaby. No one remembered how to finish. But it was there. A single broken melody limping through the air like a memory wearing old boots. Lena smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It didn't light the room, but it was real. It stretched just enough to ease the line in her brow, just enough to say, "I remember this." "If I go," she said, eyes still on the box, "I forget the sound." Elias swallowed hard. He didn't try to explain how memories worked, didn't offer something wise about loss or healing. He just watched her face for a long moment, then said the only thing that mattered. "Then stay." She turned toward him, really turned, and looked at him like she needed to be sure it wasn't just something people say when they want to feel kind. "You mean it?" He nodded once, solid, unflinching. "You're not a burden, Lena. You're a girl with a birthday." The music box wheezed its final note and clicked to a stop, but neither of them moved. Not yet. The judge came without a gavel, without a robe, and without much ceremony. Just a long coat dusted from travel, a leather satchel with scuffed corners, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and remembered all of it. He stepped down from the wagon without help, boots crunching into the dry summer soil, and stood for a moment staring out at the ranch as if trying to measure it not by its size, but by its quiet. Elias met him at the fence, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands rough with work. He didn't smile, didn't offer more than a short nod. The judge nodded back. Inside the cabin, the air held still. The windows were open, curtains breathing soft against the frames. Lena May poured tea, careful and practiced, her hands steady as rain. She didn't speak unless spoken to. The judge watched her closely, not with suspicion, but with a kind of patience that only comes from years of listening for truth that doesn't shout. She placed his cup gently on the table without spilling a drop. Elias sat across from him, not rigid, not slouched, just there, like he always had been. When the judge finally asked why, Elias didn't flinch. "I didn't know I needed someone to remember," he said plainly, "until she reminded me." The judge leaned back, let the silence settle. He watched Lena through the window after that. Watched her step into the yard and kneel by the gate, pulling the hinge up with both hands, tapping the pin down with a rock. She moved like she belonged, like the land had already decided she was part of it. He turned back to Elias. "You never asked for her." "No," Elias said. "But I never asked for the rain either. Still, I'm better when it comes." They didn't say much after that. Just sat and let the tea go cold, and the day move forward like it always does, indifferent to decisions that could shift the shape of a life. That night, Elias lit the lantern and walked out to the cedar post at the front of the ranch. It stood just past the gate, old and split, the names carved into it, like a ledger of those who'd called this place home. His wife's name had once been there, but the weather had taken it, softened it into memory. Now only one name remained, deep and unshaken: Elias Harlow. He took out his pocket knife, unfolded it slow. The blade glinted in the lamplight. Under his name, he began carving. Lena May Harlow. Each letter pressed deep, each stroke careful. When it was done, he paused, looking at the space beside it. Then, with the same blade, he etched the final words of the poem her mother never finished, the ones Lena whispered in sleep and held close to her chest like a secret meant only for spring. "You are the reason spring waits." He stepped back, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked at the names not as labels, but as proof that something broken could be made steady again. That a girl could become a daughter, not by blood, but by choosing to stay.